Okay. All right, so on behalf of the LaRouche Political Action Committee, I want to welcome everybody here today. My name is Dennis Speed, and we're going to go right into our, if you will, Easter uprising presentation. There are a lot of things that could be said. I know some people have seen the paper Easter: A Time for Reflection. I know that there may be some questions about that, among other things. Lynn, would you like to give an opening statement, or do you want to go right to Q&A?
I would like to encourage people to recognize we are going through a desperate operation to make sure everything is clear, because of the awkward characteristic of the seated people with respect to the whole operation. So be careful, and I think it'll all work.
Okay, fine. All right. The idea for the people who will be asking questions will be, again, to be direct, short, wait for an answer. If you have a follow-up, then pronounce that. Okay, so let's go to our first question.
Hi, Lynn. This is Brian from LA. Well, now in New York. I recently read two documents of yours. The first one is back in '89. You wrote LaRouche sentenced, "I become a martyr," and the other one is Easter: A Time for Reflection. I think my question to you is, in trying to reflect within myself, this mission of Jesus Christ. Can you define for us, how can we challenge ourselves to accept the mission that Christ accepted, even in our time?
You can't. What you have to do, you have to respond to the position that you're operating in, and don't try to make yourself in Christ's position. You don't have that position. Therefore, what you have to do is you have to take the principle of obedience of what the ministry is and get that across. Because you're in the third party. You look at Paul, for example. Paul's statements. Look at how the way they were always situated by Paul in his writings, his publications. You take the same position, and then you don't have a problem.
Thank you.
Okay, next question.
Hi, Mr. Rick. This is Rick from Bergen County, New Jersey.
Good, I think.
This question might be pretty obvious and basic, and I apologize if it is, but a few days ago I was at a 9/11 meeting where a person who had written a book analyzing the 9/11 situation gave a presentation, and I was in the room with some people who have been at this sort of thing for about 20, 30, 40 years. And it occurred to me at by the Q&A part of the meeting that there are a lot of people in the room, a lot of people who have very in-depth knowledge. A lot of people realize that there's a provocation of a war with Russia, and that this government is totally inadequate and needs to be purged, et cetera, et cetera. Yet it seems that a lot of people fall into the trap of analyzing, almost over-analyzing a situation as though continued analysis of what's almost obvious is going to come up with a broader solution. So I put out at the end that, the New Silk Road, that having a goal that's over and above the whole situation, that will propel everyone forward and the whole situation forward, will solve these problems in the striving for the higher level goal. but staying mired in overanalyzing and continuing to come up with small details on something is really not going to be the way to resolve and solve the whole situation. Do you think that's the right approach?
I think you're right. I think you're right. The point is, you can. We're talking about going into a period within the two terms now, new terms now, and we're trying to take the backside of the moon, and the backside of the moon is going to be the standard from which we, in the due course, will present ourselves, because we will place the relationship of mankind in respect to the planet in terms of these kinds of conditions. So we're going. All you have to do is don't get tricky. Simply say we are now speaking from the standpoint, for this case, we're now speaking from the standpoint of the backside of the moon, and what the implication of the backside of the moon means. In other words, all you have to do is don't try to get a summation that fits all places. You have to say, everyone, in this situation, here's what we know. And keep to that modest statement of what the problem is. We only know what we know. And we know that to the degree that we can account for what we are asserting is the case. If you try to get tricky, you make a mess of it. Make a straightforward statement. I am making this statement on this basis. And we're doing it all right now, because we got our Keisha and is working on the space program. Voice. Her voice is now the face, that voice. So we're now in the right area. That's the right area. And don't try to shove something else in there.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, next. Okay, yes, right over. John, you'll have to adjust the mic, I think, again.
Yeah. Okay, can you hear me?
I think so.
You think so? Let's see.
I have to verify this.
My name is Jens. I'm Danish and come from Denmark. I'm only here as a visitor. I would say I represent an organization in Denmark called Russia-Danish Dialogue. And we cooperate very closely and successfully with the LaRouche organization in Denmark, and which I know very well. I have a question which actually concretely pertains to Denmark, because as you all know, of course, that in Europe, European Union, we pursue a policy toward Russia, which we, in my organization, very much oppose. We think it's close to being suicidal. But I have a question which actually concerns our country, because as you probably know, Greenland is a part of my country. Yeah. And if we will have a climate change, which a lot of people talk about, we might have in the coming very soon, actually. And it means that the northern part of Russia, the Arctic area, will soon be interesting in many ways. There's a lot of energy potential. There's a lot of economic, social development potential in this area. And I would very much be interested in your take on the future, the potentials of potential cooperation with Russia in the Arctic area, and also what happens if we will not overcome the sanctions policy towards Russia. So first, your take on the potentials of this cooperation, and secondly, also the meaning and the consequences of the sanctions policy.
All right, this is the proper answer to your question. Is a little bit difficult to deal with, not for me, but because most people operate on the basis of presumptions about these matters, which I know are false. For example, the dominant feature in the planet, of our planet, is the assumption that assumptions which are based on convictions which are absurd. But most nations in the world today tend toward foolish ideas about differences among nations. Because for right now, the entire transatlantic community is a wasteland. Right now. The center lies in Russia and China. That's where the strength of humanity lies at this time, for purposes of reference. So what happened is the transatlantic community, which is essentially a satanic community, essentially, in terms of the history of it. The British system, for example. The British system is a satanic system, intrinsically. And the Irish will always tell you that. The honest Irish will always tell you that. Right? So the point is, we have to simply understand that what mankind is, not what the people are. What is mankind? What are mankind's properties? What is the effect of mankind? What is the role of mankind in respect to the solar system and beyond? What's the significance? I can tell you right now that the transatlantic community is a wasteland. Now, it's not entirely a wasteland, but it's under the influence of a wasteland tendency. And certain parts are less and more of that question. So I think the point, what you have to do is you have to shoot the thing properly and say what we're concerned about. In order to understand what this reality is, we have to start with the backside of the moon and look at the reality from the standpoint of the backside of the moon, which we have not yet seen. We will have some shadow of it. We'll have to come. So we have to use our mind to understand what the powers are of the human mind, which lead us applicably to the kinds of things we have to consider. And people have to learn to adjust themselves to the reality with which they are unfamiliar, not familiar. And that's the whole point. You're seeing this in China, for example. People around the world don't understand this China concept. They don't understand it at all. So therefore, we have to accept the process that we're going to operate from the backside of the moon. We're going to discover what the backside of the moon is. And from that standpoint, when we made that experiment successfully, now we will set a new standard for describing what the meaning of mankind is. The backside of the moon. And the space program that we'd had up to the time that Obama crushed that problem, that principle, has got to be restored. And that's what we're doing in Texas, in this Texas area in particular. We're going to the backside of the moon. We haven't reached it yet, but we're working to get to that point of view. But Obama cut that out, and therefore we have to remove Obama from the scene. And then we have to do a better job. Otherwise, plain ideas is what you want to work with.
Yes, thank you. Maybe you have given me an answer, because I would like to have to hear your opinion right now about European Union. Because right now in Denmark and Germany and France, we're discussing the future of European Union. Does it have a future at all? But if we see in your perspective, how do you see the European Union and the future? Will it have a future at all? How you see it?
But the future means that Russia and China and other places around the planet, the ones that are going to be the future, are part of the future. Those things will survive. Much of the conventional opinion today will not survive. That's why we have wars in the transatlantic community. That's why we had these wars, because we had wars over issues which were not the right issues to be concerned. And so therefore we have to use our minds to understand, what is mankind able to do? And the answer is, we must be able to do the things that we must do. And we're going to have to discover many of these things that we are going to have to learn how to do.
Yes, thank you.
Great.
Hi, Lynn. So over the past week, thank you. The past week, I've had several meetings with people from all over the world, somebody from the nuclear industry, some professors who are involved in water management in Asia, in context of our upcoming conference. And yesterday I had a very good meeting with an Asian diplomat who is now a senior advisor to Myanmar, the country of Myanmar, which
Yes.
on one hand has been going through a lot of internal conflicts, pretty much because of British policies, British Empire meddling. For people who don't know, Myanmar also today produces huge quantities of opium. And there's a lot of, which is an entire British operation, just like Afghanistan, and there's a lot of conflicts over that. But on the other hand, what China has unleashed in that region, the potential through the Kra Canal and other water projects, that, you know, in the discussion with this UN personnel, diplomat, he was very clear on that. He said, yes, that region is set to explode potentially for the good forever. So that is also another area, you know, we are following up. I'm following up in regards to our upcoming conference, but I just wanted your thoughts on the whole development that's going on in Southeast Asia, in Myanmar, other regions under China's influence, and what they're doing to counter the British influence.
All right. I has spent some time, in modern time, in Myanmar, and I had been associated with people like the general officers of the city. Now, what happened was we were going to go immediately, directly by cutting a canal out of that water thing, which would change the whole characteristic of all the southern waters as such. And what happened was that got suppressed. And then what happened is then some of the powers inside of Myanmar were screwed up. They got themselves into messes they shouldn't have gotten into, and so forth and so forth. But we were, and at that point, I was actually in approval of getting this program done, and I had Japan was involved in this. The leading influences of Japan were agreed to do this Myanmar cut, which would open the southern seas, and that was one of my projects. But then at a certain point, that project got shut down. And then complications came in next. I would say if you look back at the history of Myanmar from that point of period, and just put that in the agenda, you can imagine what would happen. Putting that canal through, which is a sort of a sand canal, you put that through, you're going through all the waters of the southern part of the United States, of the world. And this would be a real revolution. It would change everything with respect to all the current problems which exist in terms of that southern waters.
True, thank you.
Next.
Good afternoon, Mr. LaRouche. This is Rod. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, just don't drift.
Is this better?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. The development of the Eurasian part of the new Silk Road will open some of the inland European nations to economic development that they have not had up to now. This will include Russia. How ready for this is Putin?
Well, it's true. But you know that Russia and China are pretty much one of the same thing right now in terms of the intention. That's it. Everything is being subordinated to that, and other nations as well who are coming into the same picture. If you just eliminate the British Empire and the transatlantic community, you can get a clear image today, a pretty clear image, about what the future of mankind is, or should be. But you have to stick to that. You've got to get rid of the British system. You've got to get rid of many of the systems of Western Europe who are not functional. I mean, Italy has lost its functional capability. France is a disaster, and so forth and so on. You see the terrors that's going on in there is terrible. So what we're going to have to do, the essential thing, apart from what we have to do with the United States, which is a very special thing, what we have to do is simply change the area and do it naturally, because you're going to have to get rid of the western area of the quarters of the Atlantic Ocean. That won't work. It won't work. It never did really work. It was an effort which sometimes succeeded, sometimes failed. But right now, the United States, all of the Americas right now are pretty much out of business. They're on the edge of an extermination in civil war, in various kinds of civil war. So Russia and China are the key points of reference for understanding what the options are for the planet as a whole.
Can I assume that the Europeans, the inland nations in Europe, will benefit if Russia and China help them out or to survive the disaster cooking in the European Union at this time?
I don't think the European Union has much of a future. What it has as a future is what remains of corrected approaches, which do not maintain the continuation of the popular issues. It doesn't work. It doesn't work in France at all. It doesn't work in Germany. It works better in Germany than it does in France. But France is not really an honest nation. It was never allowed to be. It was going to be an honest nation under de Gaulle. But when de Gaulle's crowd was kicked out, France became a bunch of degenerates, which it had been before. And you have problems in Spain, the same kind, other kinds of things. So you can't make particular selections. You have to recognize what the problem is. And I would say now that what has happened with Russia and China is these are the levers which are creating the options for the future of mankind throughout the planet. There's much in culture that can be saved. You want to save the useful cultures, but don't try to save the system as a whole.
Thank you.
Okay, next.
Hi, how are you?
Pretty good. Get in front of the microphone so I can get you clearly.
Right, Clarette from Boston.
Good.
Yeah. So I want to make a short report. I think that you might appreciate this because it fits in the unpractical category, and it has to do with your cultural intervention and the work of your wife a couple of years ago in Boston. And you might remember we had a concert there at the Holy Cross Cathedral. There were 1,200 people there, all walks of life. And we were celebrating the 50th anniversary of another concert that was held on the occasion of John Kennedy's assassination. It was a Mozart Requiem concert. And Helga spoke there. Now, a few blocks away from this concert was held in the south end of Boston. A few blocks from there is City Hospital. And as you know, City Hospital, even till this day, with all of its faults, still cares for the sick and the downtrodden. Well, a few months ago, I walked into one of the medical building lobbies, and to my surprise, there were two young people performing J.S. Bach duet between a clarinet and a soprano. And the patients were so thrilled. And then last week, Now, this is very, modest. These are not, it's not a lot of people, and it's very modest, and it's in its infancy. But last week I went to the hemoglobinopathy and cancer care clinic, and when I walked in, there was a young black woman serenading the patients there on her violin with Schumann and Brahms. So my point is that some people might call this a conspiracy. I don't know if you have anything to do with this.
I would say it's a good comparison. We got to get it. I think it's a good conspiracy. Or not.
Okay, next.
Yes, when EIR ran a feature a month ago entitled "How the FBI Crushed America's Spirit," which included the transcript of the extensive video report that we had done a couple of years ago with former Congressman Neil Gallagher, who you know well. Interestingly, the title that we gave to that interview, "The Assassination of President Kennedy and the FBI Takeover of America." Neil and several of us have been in a dialogue for about 40 years. Much of it's focused on the FBI and related matters for reasons that you know. Since your emphasis over the last period has been increasingly these enemy operations, FBI and the forces that the FBI represents in an attempt to destroy this movement, so on. Neil and I have been talking a lot about this, and I thought it'd be useful. He cannot, for health reasons, he can't be here. I thought it would be useful to pose a question or get his thinking on this, both as a reflection on his part, and he really would like your thoughts on this. So we have this set up for I think the audio should be prepared to play for you and for the audience, and then what thoughts you have when we finish that.
Okay.
Okay?
Good.
Well, Elliot, I certainly want to congratulate you, actually, and Jeff for the great work that you continue to do under the leadership of Lynn. I have long admired his lonely fight to alert the United States and its people as to the great threat federal law enforcement and the associated intelligence agencies that now intertwine between petty criminals and major security threats and draw no line. Some of the latest questions, such as the Apple trying to preserve certain privacy rights of their instruments, points out a glaring problem that I see, and that problem is that a whole subculture in intelligence work and law enforcement work exists in this country that affects the body politics and the very existence of freely elected governments, where you have these agencies who can control the behavior and modify the behavior of elected officials. It's all right, we speak about social issues, but what prohibits public men from raising the issue of whether our freedom can continue to exist as we fight terrorists and other threats to America that have existed for years? I point out just one example. While you have a different kind of leadership today in the FBI, you cannot ignore that there's enormous one of the greatest law enforcement agencies in the world, if not the greatest, was once headed by one of America's great monsters, J. Edgar Hoover, and his elite group that was running things that were a threat not only to the Congress, but to the president's blackmail, and to continue his growth for his own perpetuation of his job. So you have this now institution. You have to prevent by law that the men entrusted with the responsibility of running these are not going to use the threat of the terrorists to enhance that power and bring about another J. Edgar Hoover, who has long perpetuated the fear in America to continue to give up our liberties and our freedom and our privacy, and in the end, democratic institutions. So these are serious issues. I see in the latest New York papers advertisements for the Catholics to come back to the church and go to confession and have these days of coming back by going to confession. It breaks my heart to remember back when I was holding my hearings that one of the biggest problems that we had was when people were writing and coming to us that the confessional booths of the Catholic Church were being bugged. I had 4 daughters who were Catholics who would go to confession regularly. I went to Cardinal Spellman in those days, who was a real big man in the Catholic Church, saying that we must protect our people. Confession is a sacrament of the church. He saw no problem with that and said that the FBI, Mr. Hoover, was protecting us. Well, in those days, there weren't many people who could afford parabolic mics, and one woman who came before us stating that she went to confession, and when she left, she was propositioned by a man who when she said, "I'm not kind of a girl," he started replaying back her confession on his mic, trying to entice her by extortion into sexual acts. So it's these kind of things that are below the surface that the subculture of federal law enforcement is providing and bringing about. I recall, for one example, when we finally got a rule to establish a permanent committee to protect privacy, and it was bipartisan. Jerry Ford and the Republicans agreed with it. The chairman of the Judiciary Committee agreed with it. We had a majority to finally pass and establish a part of the government as a review board on some of the issues of privacy and freedom, democratic institutions. Well, at the day of the hearing, Mr. Seller, the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, came over with tears in his eyes, telling me that he had to break his word that this committee would support my bill. I couldn't understand why. He said that Hoover personally had called him and told him that he had tapes on his brother, and that if Seller did not oppose my bill, that they were going to make that public and have his brother indicted. He was his law partner. So you can see how it's okay and it's great to fight terrorists, but it's also more important to preserve our liberty and to preserve the right of the elected officials, most of whom are decent people, to perform their job without the chilling effect of the secrets being held by bugging, wiretapping, mail openings, garbage collection, and now breaking the codes of private conversations on what is not supposed to be, and what is supposed to be a very protected environment in the new technological era that we now live. It's time also we must fight terrorism, but we must also eliminate the fear that is chilling freedom in America by federal law enforcement agencies. And I know Lynn has been doing a wonderful job, and you people have been doing a great job. One of the things that is very sad is that your voices are not being heard on a louder venue, and I hope the great work that you have been doing will be recognized. I thank you for your call, and you have my great admiration for what you are doing in this field.
Well, I would say...
well, thank you, and
right.
We're going to...
You're absolutely right on the points you make and state. And we're getting an echo voice. Get the echo out of there. No, what it's true. Everything he says, insofar as he says it, is quite correct. The essential thing is the FBI was what, and still today. What is the FBI still today? It represents the force of evil and represents actually the British interest, the British royal family interest. That's how it operates. That's how it was established. What happened and then they, at that point, through the British influence, the President of the United States himself was crushed and died soon after being crushed. Because, you know, I had friends who I came to know, and I remember that image. The president had left his office. He was on the basis of dying, and he was retiring into his office. He was on the basis of dying in process. And two men walked down a corridor from what had been the president's own office. And they looked at each other. And they understood that the United States was being destroyed in its existence by the FBI, what became the FBI. And the FBI has been the enemy of the United States ever since its composition. And we will never have freedom in the United States until you get rid of the FBI. And what he said, all true. The question is, what is the cause? What is the cause for which we fight on this issue? He's right. I agree. It's important.
Okay. All right. Next question.
Good afternoon, Mr. LaRouche. This is Inola McGuire speaking. Well, I've been paying attention to all of the going-ons politically and otherwise. And I would like to know what is your suggestion concerning training for young people. Because if America needs to get back into, I must say, building roads, the infrastructure, what do you suggest?
First thing you've got to do is you've got to get rid of the present government of the United States. Not because of the whole government system, but because the government system is a tool, has made itself a tool of the British interests. And that's the fact. And therefore, our people are frightened because most people in the United States are weak. They're weak in their power. And therefore, the police forces of the United States will repress people, as you know yourself exactly how that works. And therefore, the problem is how do you get people to move in such a way that they reestablish the principle of our own Constitution? And that's what the problem is. People go out and say, if this, if that, if this, if that, in terms of changes. But the point is, there's one change which has to be made, and that is the thing of true freedom under our code of organization.
Okay, thank you very much.
Hi, Lynn. It's Alvin here in New York.
Yes, aware of that.
Good. Look, this week, what I wanted to bring up with you will stem partly from the statement you put out, a lesson for us all. And this is as it pertains to the continuing to work to build up the conference for the 7th. I have a number of people that have registered, about a handful. I'm working more with that, and I'm pleased. Now, these are older people. In my age group, maybe a little younger or older. And I find, it seems to me that they are at least somewhat attracted and capable of understanding what the purpose of the conference is as it relates to the crisis and the future of mankind. However, now in talking with people in the 40-year or in that range, age range, I'm encountering something completely different. And you know, you always refer to a degeneration, and I think I think this generation is really something that I wanted to talk with you about, because overall, as they appear to agree with things and understand things are bad, what really there's this fixation or this slavish devotion to money. Now, this is very ironic because this is the same age group that is being destroyed nationwide. Though here in New York, they seem to be so insulated or lack such compassion that they're either unaware or really these people aren't moved by very much. Again, I find the older generation depressed, demoralized, pessimistic. But these guys and gals have a complete thing. And, you know, it's funny because they'll also say there's two things that they essentially believe in, that's sex and money. And they're very upfront about that. So I'm encountering this, and now you don't back off, you hold your ground, and they get a fair amount of ridicule, which they deserve. But there's this generational difference I'm seeing that I'm encountering more and more, and maybe I'm just giving you a report, and like to hear your response to this.
Okay. Well, essentially, there's no real difficulty in what you're saying in terms of this thing. It's worse. you are understating the problem. But the point is what? We have a process of destruction. Now, how this happened? Bertrand Russell. The degeneration of the United States was set into motion by British interests, by Bertrand Russell. He was the evil bastard who started the whole operation. What happened was, with each generation that was coming into the 20-year interval of age group, became worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. Because what had come out of the influence of Bertrand Russell on the United States culture as well as on the British culture was systemic degeneration. What you're seeing now, the effects that you're seeing, for example, let's take all the people we know about who lost their position or were deactivated, and they degenerated. They committed suicides in one way or another. That's what's happened. Who did it? The British Empire. That's who did it. And the point is, we're at a point now where the implication for the United States is crush everything that resembles the British system. Crush it now. And don't forgive the French whores either. They are abundant. And so forth. Europe is being corrupt itself by corruption, by its own corruption. It gives way to corruption. So what's happened now, we found out that the entire system, since from Bertrand Russell, and his parents, into the present time, the United States, and as we have experienced it heretofore, requires a great sweeping change. Because if you're looking at what you're seeing in the population of living persons in the United States, they don't have the mental power to understand what the purpose of mankind is. And therefore, the thing has come to a point of time, there will be a great change. And the great change will be located in such places as China, Russia, and other locations outside the transatlantic community. And we are in process now is the survival of the United States and what it had represented depends upon that change right now. It's going to be a tough change, but you look at what's happening to the people. Say take 3 generations, 20 each of these. You see, the degeneration is immense. And there's only a tiny part of the entire U.S. population which has any comprehension of what the intention had been of the United States as we know it. It's degeneration. So we're fighting against degeneration, and we're looking for allies of views, of points of views, of people who will create something new. Because look at all the people that have been deprived of their mental kind of life they should have had. They're degenerating. They're committing suicide of all kinds. So what we have to do is we have to really take the opportunity, because right now, on the edge of this moment, on this moment itself, the United States as an organization is on the edge of a general collapse. Now, the only thing that we can do from here is take what we have from the inside of the United States that still has some element in it, and recognize the fact that we're going to a great crisis, a great financial crisis, which is due to come very soon. And when that crisis comes upon us, and it will, there won't be much left in the United States of power, unless we can intervene with help from abroad on this issue. We can restart what was once the United States.
We will intervene. Thanks, Lynn.
Okay. Somebody.
Aha! We have to lower the telephone for you.
Mr. LaRouche, I come from California, where in Alameda I had asked you a question regarding music, and I come here by the graces of Mindy and Miwa. I want to just express first my gratitude, because these people are among the finest in the universe to me, and this has the most integrity and the most genuine love in action, and you take the cosmic love and you put it into action, and I'm so grateful to be here. And I wanted to ask you, how does one go about when meeting up with such resistance in terms of Russia and China? Good people that I run into all the time, they say, oh, you can't go, them, they're dictators, you can't, they won't have anything to do with it. So I'm finding it really challenging to come forward, to organize so that, through the music, which I was very, very, very touched by your reference in one of your latest talks to about the epidemic of suicide, alcoholism, drug addiction, which is just the attempt of people to counter their fear, to to connect with their spirits, their soul. As Longfellow said, this, the director of my Shakespeare company said his favorite poem is "Life is earnest, life is real, and the grave is not its goal. Dust thou art, to dust returneth, was not spoken of the soul." And I think that's what this, the gentleman that just spoke was referring to in this coming generation, that all they want is sex and money because they've lost that connection. So I guess what I'm asking is, how would you go about reaching these people so that we're all on the same page, as it were?
I would say you want to look at some great people from the past. And there were in that process great people who came up out of, well, shall we say, the Renaissance period, and this was largely crushed in that period. The Catholic Church was destroyed itself and was crushed in that period. Right? Then the church itself tried to struggle for its freedom again, because the hatred against the religious codes at that time really disgusted people. It was a sudden change where people were actually cooked to death for no reason whatsoever. And then there was a break of freedom. And the freedom, various people created freedom, helped it. And we have, the result was the creation of the United States out of this process. And we began to lose it again. We lost it again. We gained it. We lost it again. We regained it. We lost it again. And I think the last score was we lost it again. And that's the last thing on record so far. So I think but if you have the understanding of what the issue was, what the issue is, you can use that standing as a point of reference for organizing yourself and other people. And that's the answer.
Thank you. God bless you. Thank you.
Oh, you're measuring him for height?
That's
higher, please.
Hi, Lynn. My name is Pim. I'm from Montreal. I came down here to help organize the Manhattan Project. And I've been reading a book on Gestalt psychology where Wolfgang Köhler talks about this idea of radical subjectivity. So it's this kind of Bertrand Russell-like idea where the only thing you can know for sure is what you take in through your senses. So, like, how do you know if something is real if you're not directly observing it? Or further, how do you know that other people are really sovereign and not just these type of automatons? And it just seems to me that most people, whether they're conscious of it or not, believe in this idea in some form. And they've become really self-centered, self-absorbed, and really focused on just getting immediate pleasure. So, and this is especially in young people, especially people my age. So my question is, first, what are your thoughts on this, and how can we really get people out of their neurosis?
Well, most people get released when something goes their way. And usually what goes their way is what leads them into disaster. So that's the problem. So therefore, you have to be really truly objective. You have to say, well, look, what's the situation? What's the historical situation? And I can tell you, the United States has no historical power to maintain itself. It doesn't. There's some things that are forces which are interesting, important, but the victory does not lie at present. The victory does not lie with us. It lies with the tyrants who dominate us. Now, under certain circumstances, which is why I'm so nasty about some things, is because I know that some things have to be fought. at all cost, because you cannot respect yourself unless you fight that fight. And that's the answer. I think it is, in short.
Thank you.
Okay, next. Let's suggest again.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon. Good afternoon.
Good.
Good, okay. This is Jessica White from Brooklyn. How are you?
Well, I'm not in such bad condition. I'm a little bit old, and so I consider that a problem.
Well, you look great. Thanks. I have a little bit to say. I don't want to talk too much because I tend to digress, but you have often talked about the purpose of mankind and the idea of a future vision. And so that reminds me of what is necessary and how, as you just said, we must regain the United States. So I just want to go over a little bit about what happened to me this week, one of my classes as a teacher. I'm a middle school teacher, but I was assigned to a second grade because their teacher was sent out on a workshop suddenly. 6 a.m. he gets a text that he has to go to a workshop. So I'm not really familiar with the little ones, but this situation I think you might find interesting. I really did. I decided that since I got this class suddenly and they're like 7, maybe 8 years old, I would ask them what they would do if they were president. So I said, okay, little guys, what if you were president? First of all, what does the president do? And I had some really cute little answers. Well, you know, the president helps people. And the president makes laws. And then one other little kid said, no, somebody else does that. You know, so I thought that was kind of cute too. And so I said, okay, well, what if you were president? What would you do to make things better? And they had to come up with ideas and then write it down. So I'm going around checking out their answers, and I see that one little boy says, well, if I was president, I'd be dead. So I say, okay, if you were president, you would be dead? What do you mean? He says, well, you know, the president, the good presidents are dead. And I said, okay, well, what do you want to do? He says, well, you're supposed to help people. You're supposed to make sure that people have food. You're supposed to make people safe. You're supposed to make sure that people have, like, a job. So I said, well, where did you get this idea from? He goes, oh, my grandpa. So I said, well, what president are you talking about that's already dead? He goes, FDR. I'm like, this is the absolute truth. I'm like, whoa. Okay, so this little guy is like 7 years old. His grandpa is talking about FDR. And he says, well, first of all, if you're president, you're dead. So then he qualified it, well, if you're a good president, you're dead. And my grandpa says that FDR was a good president. So if we do this, if we do our job, and we make sure that we have a future for these little kids, these little 7 and 8-year-olds, it re-justifies, or I'm trying to think of the word, it instills in me, and I want to pass it on to everyone else, that we have to do this in order to make sure that there's a future for these little second graders. And the way to do that is to do what we do, to keep doing what we're doing. And I'd kind of like you to comment on the idea of the future and a vision of mankind, and what will inspire all of us, like you always do, to work harder to make sure that even though that generation that is talking about sex and money is fading away, fortunately, they won't be here forever, but these little 7th and 8-year-olds are coming up, and that is our future. So if you could just comment on that idea.
Okay. Right. I'm going to give you a shocking, for many of you, a shocking exposition on what this issue is. The usual assumption is that children, once born, become the maker of the future. And that is not necessarily true. It is not universally true. Why? The idea is, what's this silly idea that a human being is born, grows up a little bit at least, grows up perhaps a little bit more. Now, how does mankind progress? Well, somebody else gives them that progress. How's that progress come about? Well, there has to be the giving of that progress is something which most people don't know how to do. Now, you know this teaching business. Now, let's suppose that you come in there, and there are little children in this place, or more somewhat middle-aged children, relatively speaking, and you find out that they develop. Is that what you wish to achieve? Is that adequate for you to achieve? Or do you have to create something about the new child, a newborn child, who would be prompted into becoming a discoverer of the future? Mankind's authority lies in the future. It lies intrinsically in the future. And what we need is we need children to be born who are not imitations of their children. Because if you don't have a person who is creative, actually individually creative, not practical. Practical people do not pass the test. It's only creative, truly creative people, creative minds, that allow mankind to make progress. And what happens whenever you lose that line, you find that populations, such as that of the United States, degenerate. And therefore the question is, can you cause the development of children to become creative forces, even in opposition to their parents, and go back to their parents and say, I am bringing this home to you to share with me as something new that you, your parent, the parents, didn't know or want or not prepared to act. And the people who have that quality are called leaders, rightly called leaders. If you can't be a leader beyond anything that popular opinion suggests, you are a failure for mankind.
Great. Thank you.
That's somebody here.
Okay, Mike.
Hello. Hi, Mr. LaRouche. Hello, Mr. LaRouche. My name is Igli Sakani, and I'm from Brooklyn. Hello?
Yeah. It's a worthy place.
My name is Igli Sakani, and I'm from Brooklyn.
Yeah.
My first time being here, and I just want to thank you. You're a grandfather figure to me. I mean, I've been always watching you on the web, on the LaRouche PAC website, and because of figures like you have helped me to understand that personal choices have to be right choices, no matter how unpopular, because your views and principles in economics and as a physical science that that man must control the noosphere, and that man is built in the image of God, is, to me, are very inspiring, and I just want to help you. I just want to thank you today. My questions are, how do you stop? At what level of government can a simple citizen change and be active on a day-to-day operations?
We need to copy the reality of Einstein. Einstein is the appropriate model in all aspects for what the future of mankind must be. And he gave a number of examples in his course of his life, which demonstrated how he, as a creative mind, was able to bring mankind ahead where the rest of mankind couldn't make it. And that's what's important. The people who are the creative people, who create things what mankind has not otherwise been able to create. And that's the standard. And Einstein is simply a symbol of the people who fit that kind of career in life.
If you could sort of help me out in terms of how do you break through in understanding new fields? Like, what gives you hope?
Well, I find, first of all, the hope comes from adversity. If you don't have adversity, if you're popular, you're probably not worth much. If you are able to create something that mankind has not yet otherwise provided, that is a success. And people who are smart, really smart, will try to achieve things that other people have not achieved. Why? Out of jealousy? No. Out of resentment against stupidity.
Thank you.
Great. Hello, Mr. LaRouche. It's Howard from New York. Always good to see you. And I've been talking to various housing activists at rallies and other places, including leftists and American Muslims and people in tenant organizations. And these people really need a flank because they're going nowhere. And I tell them that China has built sort of a subway system nationally that is 11,000 miles long and goes 200 miles per hour. And, you know, this is what we have to get in touch with and be part of. And in many cases, the response is very weak, and they have a hard time grabbing anything international. But so that's where we are.
Space program. When Obama cut out the space program, they destroyed and crushed the minds of the people of the United States. That's what the problem is. And you look at the space program, just go back and study who the people were who did the space program, who developed it. This was achievement. What happened? Obama crushed the United States. That was his mission. He killed people. He killed them on schedule. Every Tuesday, he killed people. I'm probably still doing it. But that's what he's done for a career. So anybody who's nice to Obama is a bad person intrinsically. What you have to do is you have to get rid of Obama and what he represents. Every step that Obama is president, that step is a step of treason against the United States.
Okay.
Hi, Lynn. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, it's Mindy.
I can see you despite your size.
I'm still short. So, hi. This is Mindy from the Bay Area, and I want to go back to this question of the future, because obviously we are creating something, as you've often stressed, that has never existed before. That's our role right now in history. And one of the great people that's played a role in this has been Furtwängler, which we heard earlier before this started. For those in the audience here, we listened to the opening of him performing the St. Matthew Passion in light of the Easter coming up. And there's a great tragedy that was done to this country, both by Bertrand Russell at the turn of the 20th century with the creation of the FBI in a similar period of time. That Furtwängler was, after 1927, kept out of the United States, that he was not allowed to return. And I see that one is the same operation, you know, that we're fighting now. And I'd like you to be able to speak, because I just think it's important for the American people to hear directly this question of this kind of standard as we're setting. You know, we're going to, as people around the country should know, we're going to do the Messiah here tomorrow in, you know, recapturing this real tradition of the creative process. And Furtwängler was one of the best examples of this question of the future, knowing the future. So I just wanted to bring it up and give you a chance to address that.
It's a question of music. The question of music as such. What do we mean by music? Now, the popular music is not good. It's no damn good at all. Right? You have to get rid of it. And you have to say, well, what is good music? What is the purpose of music? Right? And therefore, what happens is that the human being, as was done in the case of Italy, in a particular case, was you had a genius who understood what the principle of music was in terms of as such. And this caused people in that time and even earlier times, Brunelleschi, for example, is an example of this kind of creative power. Brunelleschi was a creative person. No man of his time was able to match his achievements. So therefore, we rely upon people who can create an innovation which reaches beyond what mankind can otherwise reach, and to share that with other people, and to use the sharing of that as something to enrich the ability of mankind to further development of project. Like the fight of the great musicians, Beethoven, for example. Beethoven's achievements are absolutely untouchable. They were never touchable. And then you had people who followed in the same generation. So that's what you're looking for. You're looking for the achievement of something which the human mind can create or discover and apply. And that's the mission, is that mankind, dead or alive, mankind must create something fruitful for the future. And it must be in a special form. When you call this great classical poetry, we call great classical music. And these are the media by which one person can know another as to be a true musician.
Thank you.
Okay, next question.
Good afternoon, Mr. LaRouche. It's Patrick from Connecticut.
Oh, yes, good. We changed his uniform. That's
yeah, the new Continental Army. Last Tuesday, Elliot and Bruce from the LaRouche Pack joined me in my hometown in Connecticut. And I set up a meeting with several people. And the first stop was at a mobile station. And every morning, a dozen or more guys meet there. And so Sam, who's a ex-politician and is the leader of this group, he also has his his own radio show, which I'm on quite a bit. It's on Thursday night from 6 to 8. Anyway, we were talking, and Sam had said, well, the thing was, oh, you can't, Sam said, oh, we can't impeach Obama. So Bruce said, the problem is cowardice. What do you think?
I agree, totally, entirely, beyond all belief.
I have more meetings set up, so. Thank you.
Is this our?
Yes, hello, LaRouche. My name is Ray Martino from Goshen, New York. My question is on the issue of ionization, can it be made strong enough? Can it be put on the water to prevent tsunamis and also control the weather? And what stages are we on the ionization? Can it be fortified, built strong enough?
Well, I would say generally, because we have one person particularly who's sitting right here beside me on this question, we do have some knowledge of exactly how to deal with this problem. We are taught that, and we also know something about the solar system and beyond. So we have a lot of knowledge of this thing. We don't have enough knowledge to satisfy us. So what you have to do is become devoted to satisfaction. That is by discovering things that you never thought you would never achieve. That's what's important, because you can communicate that to other people as well, and that makes the whole thing work.
Okay, Lynn, so that is it for today in terms of questions. But what's going to happen right after this is that we are going to have a assembly of the elect. The elect, yes. What they're going to do, this is a chorus. So our chorus is going to have to meet because we're going to be doing our performance tomorrow of Messiah, which will be led by, John already left to, I guess, get himself ready.
Being disguised.
Yeah, there's the maestro there. So basically, I would, if there's something summary you'd like to say to everybody here.
I think this is very interesting. I think this was very satisfactory, and you should enjoy it.
All right.
Think about it and enjoy it.
Very good. Okay. Thank you. We'll see you next week.